When I interviewed Dudley Moore at his house in Hampstead in the 60s, he was riding high. Worldwide fame through Beyond the Fringe and a superb television comedy series with Peter Cook. Add all this to his burgeoning reputation as a jazz musician and a composer. But he was not to know then that he would become a genuine Hollywood film star after the success of Arthur, in which he had memorable comic scenes with John Gielgud. In all, Moore made about 35 films, but he will always be remembered best for his unique talent for mixing music with humour. Naturally, my first question was, what came first, comedy or music?
Well, in fact, I started off as a musician. I was interested in music from a very early age. Took it rather for granted, I suppose. I sang in school choirs and the church choir, and eventually started playing the organ for services. And I think comedy reared its ugly head when I was about 13, when I started to fool around at school, to make myself a bit more popular with the children about me than I was at the time. I did it as a defense mechanism, really, and consequently spent a lot of time trying to work things that didn't take too much effort, because I was spending so much time trying to amuse my companions. And I turned to music because it was the thing that I'd always been studying, and it eventually sort of took over my whole academic life, such as it was. And I went to university and studied music, and ended up doing both music and comedy. So it was really it's all really due to the fact that I started fooling around at school, that I took music so seriously, or that I devoted so much time to it. I wanted actually to start on the violin first, but my mother, I'm not sure whether it was wisely or unwisely, I think it was a good move in the end, said that I should, in fact, learn the piano first, as it would give me probably a more thorough grounding in music, and certainly it's a very good instrument, an essential instrument really to learn for the study of harmony and so forth. So I started the piano when I was about, I think it was about 6, and then I started the violin when I was 11 or 12, and the organ when I was about 16. I started the organ because it was, there are organ scholarships at Oxford and Cambridge, which you can win, that enable you to go to the university and study whatever you like. And it seemed a very convenient way of getting into college. So that's the reason why I took up the organ, apart from the fact that I was playing at church on Sundays at all the services, So I'd already taken it up, as it were, before I did it officially. When I come to think of it, my first paid performance was, I think, as a choir boy, of course, when I used to sing for weddings, and I think used to get 1 and 6 a time for each wedding. But then when I was an organist, I became assistant organist at the church where I was, St. Thomas's Becontree in Dagenham. And I used to get £1 a time for playing a wedding, and when Saturdays came up, which is when all the weddings were, I used to sort of rub my hands hoping for 4 or 5 weddings. It used to be rather a good haul. I remember the organist, who I think was not really too happy to do all the weddings, but wanted to collect something, said, now, supposing I let you do all the weddings, and I give you 10 and 6 instead of the guinea, but then you can do all the weddings. He used to do maybe 2 and I used to do 3. But I worked it out, and I said, no, I think I'd prefer to do just what you give me and collect the whole lot, So I must have been quite shrewd in those days. I'm a bit different now, I think. I think there is a lot of humour in my jazz, because I like to, as it were, amuse people while I'm playing, not only play something that I feel is serious musically, Peterson, for all the sort of the superficial excitement and the superficial dexterity. Underneath it, there is an extraordinary musicianship. And I think one can always be deceived by the good-natured feeling of music, to come to the conclusion that it's just light. But in fact, I like to make my jazz, again, serious, but with humour on top. And the marvellous thing about jazz is that you can regulate it as you go along. I mean, if you feel you're getting too serious, you can sort of pop in a joke, as it were. And I don't mean just sort of playing a couple of sour notes or something, but I mean rhythmically and so forth, you can affect the spirit of it. I think one continually needs to defend oneself, and therefore my need for doing humour has been ever present. But the spiritual side of jazz, I think, again, that is something that is, I can't really separate them at all. It really is quite impossible. At the moment, I feel I have no real need for either, because I've sort of ground to a halt in my work, in the sense that I don't really know what to do next, and possibly it's because I'm questioning the fact that when I played around in school and became a performer, I'm questioning the whole sort of basis of that. I've come to the point where I'm sort of slightly paralyzed in as regards knowing what to do next, possibly because I've thought about it such a lot, and I've thought, well, that's the reason why I played jazz, or that's the reason why I fooled about, and it's all become a bit sort of involved. Well, I've had in the past an ambition to write an opera. In fact, I've had it for some considerable time. And the only reason why I've dropped the ambition is the fact that I've not got down to writing one, and I'm not sure whether I really want to write one, so I'm rather fed up with saying to myself it's about time I wrote an opera, and finding that actually nothing happens. So I've dropped the idea, hoping that maybe it'll creep up on me unawares and become a more attractive proposition. I would like to do something outrageous musically, in a sense, but I feel this is in a way part of my condition at the moment. I want to do something sort of outrageous. I feel I haven't been outrageous enough in my life. I've conformed in many ways, and I feel now I would like to make some sort of break. I don't mean sort of go absolutely mad or eccentric or bizarre, but do something that is really, really me, In my slightly earlier years, which wasn't that long ago, I hasten to add, I was very much attracted to the idea of becoming an organist and choir master. That was, I suppose, up to the age of about 21. But then the idea sort of fizzled out, and I lost contact with church, and I lost contact with choir singing and playing the organ for services. And I must say I do miss it a great deal. But of course the overall effect of that training, if you like, lingers over. Musically, as I say, I have reminiscences of it. From an actual spiritual point of view, I think it's given me a great deal of torment and anxiety and guilt and so forth, because I've largely abandoned the church, whereas I find myself in quite a dilemma, not really having a purpose in life or any particular faith. It makes it, rather difficult to know exactly why to do anything, and what's it all about, Alfie, sort of thing. You get to the point where you really find that you're being active, and yet you don't really know why. I mean, why should one sort of play the piano or go on a stage, except to earn one's living, of course. So one does get a bit troubled by that, certainly. I think it's given me more trouble than joy, only because I'm in that sort of condition at the moment. When I was best man for a friend of mine, I wrote an anthem for him called God is Love. It was a text from the Bible. And I wrote it as lovingly as I could and as sincerely as I could, in the sense that I try to make it as beautiful as I could and as illustrative of the words as I could. But actually feeling any religious fervour was, rather cancelled out. But the reason why I would like to write music of a religious nature at any time would be the sound of it in a church, the sound of boys singing, the sound of an organ playing, which I find a most moving experience, but that's the only real reason. And I would be aware of some sort of intangible force, maybe, and I certainly am aware of that, and that would be very moving for me. But as regards cementing a Christian faith, then that's not possible, because there's no real faith there at the moment.
When you work with Peter Cook, do you have a direct division of labour? He takes on one role and you another, or is it complete improvisation all the way through?
Peter has this marvellous sort of area of fantasy, which he indulges in, and with which he enriches the sort of structure of the sketch. And I have a slightly more ground-based feeling about sketches, and I think probably the combination is good, since we balance each other out on that. Invariably we say, we sort of wander about each other's lounge or garden and say, oh, let's do a thing about such and such, and we just get a germ of an idea, just two people generally. Well, generally it has to be two people because there's two of us. That's the platitude of the century. We just get a situation, either two characters who are interesting, or a situation that is interesting into which two characters can enter, and then we try and sort of think about the way the sketch could go, and if we think we've got something that's going to be workable, we'll go to a tape recorder and improvise. And when we've improvised, we'll listen to it back, and I generally take notes from the improvisation, sort of headings, like to try and sort of formulate the structure. And then we'll improvise again and refer to the notes, and also put in other little bits that we've discussed after hearing the first version through. Then we hear the second version through, and we do the same thing. We'll omit something else, add something else, and we do that all the time. It's a question of sort of a little touch of salt here and a little bit of pruning there, and gradually the sketch builds up verbally between us. We never write it down except in the form of headings, and in this way we endeavour to keep the feeling of the sketches as spontaneous as possible. We don't like to refer to a script, although there are some portions of the script where we say the words exactly because something else has to come out exactly. And there are other portions of the script where we can waffle a bit, and not be as rigid in our delivery of the idea. And sometimes, of course, when we allow ourselves the opportunity to ad lib, although those moments are probably rarer than a lot of people think. Well, there's always a natural division of parts between us. Peter always plays a sort of rather upper class fellow who's, and I'm generally the sort of timid, compliant man. And in a sense, this is what we are, I suppose. Although I'm trying to change myself personally so that I don't feel that I have to play that sort of part. I mean, that's not the prime purpose of trying to change, of course, so that I can play different parts. But certainly those are the parts we slip into most easily, and they do relate to ourselves individually. They don't relate to ourselves as a partnership. I wouldn't say that, Peter says this and I say, oh, yes, well, we'll do that, because we have an equal say in things, and we can be very stubborn with each other. But when it comes to playing characters, I generally go, well, I think every performer goes to what he feels he knows best, which is, of course, himself, and he slightly inflates it or distorts it. And I am vaguely compliant, vaguely timid, and of course I make a shot at reproducing that in sketches, because I know that that's the sort of thing I know best. It's the sort of thing I can be fluent in. If I played an upper-class fellow who was very dominant, I would find it difficult to sustain that, only because I'm not sure of the character enough. You know, I'm not an upper-class dominant person. I have nothing to fall back on. But as a compliant man, I can fall back on all sorts of rather ghastly experiences.
Where did the Pete and Dud funny voice come from?
Well, the actual characters came really out of the blue. Peter had an idea for a sketch, and we just formulated two characters who we thought would be very good for that particular sketch. And in fact, when we did that sketch in England first, we had such a good reaction to it that we included those particular characters in every show we did. The voices, I don't know where they came from. They're really a mixture of so many things, people I knew when I was young. Although I can't actually remember anybody who spoke like that, but it just seemed to be the sort of voice that was right for the sketch, and it stuck. The appearance of the characters was something that was very easy to decide upon. I remember a bloke at my father's church who used to look rather like the Dud character, with a cloth cap and a raincoat. He used to take the collection plate up to the altar, and he looked so pathetic. He used to make me practically burst into tears every time I saw him. And I think that's why I used the cloth cap and the raincoat. And this voice, I don't know why that came out, but somehow it seemed to illustrate the complete gullibility, the ultimate compliance of the personality, and of course it was a marvelous sort of role to play, where I agreed with everything that Pete said. Oh yes, that's right. Yeah, of course you're right. Pete's always right, and Dad's always wrong. You know, he says he comes out with these interesting things now and again, but then Pete corrects him. You know, and he sort of looks at Pete with an admiring glance. And again, we had the division of parts, with Peter as the sort of superior bloke who knows everything about the universe and religion and just anything. And Dad is the bloke who accepts everything he says as gospel. When we did Beyond the Fringe, I think it was the most exciting time for all of us. It was our first real big sort of stab at professional review, and the publicity surrounding it when we were at Edinburgh was marvellous, and when we got to London we had these marvellous reviews. And it was a most happy time, a most exhilarating time, and I'm very proud to have been associated with it, which sounds a little sort of oily, I suppose, but in a sense I feel proud and lucky, really, because I didn't really contribute any of the political or literary satire. I used to sit around while everybody else did that, because I had nothing to offer in that area. And I used to do the musical items in the show. And it wasn't until later on, when we were in New York and we were sort of updating the show a bit in our sort of third year, that I started to contribute more of myself. When I first went into Beyond the Fringe, I felt slightly sat upon by the extraordinary literary and political awareness of the other three, and I really sort of kept my mouth shut. And I felt very inhibited by them at first. And it wasn't till later that I felt able to be myself, until when we came back from America, we did the shows, Peter and I did the television shows, where I felt really comfortable doing the sort of domestic humour that I was familiar with.
I've heard and read about a dozen different stories of how Beyond the Fringe came into being. Could we have the Dudley Moore version?
Well, this is the genuine, authentic story. a friend of mine, funny enough actually, we used to get asked this question quite a few times, as you can imagine, and we used to try and get a sort of little précis down as to the shortest possible way of saying it, which always used to take a couple of hours, so watch out. A friend of mine who was at Oxford with me became the assistant to the director of the Edinburgh Festival, and he had the idea of putting on a university review as part of the official Edinburgh Festival. My friend asked myself if I'd like to do it, and now was it Peter Cook or Jonathan Miller? I think Jonathan Miller he knew from Cambridge. Myself from Oxford and Jonathan from Cambridge wanted to make it an Oxford and Cambridge review, you see. And he asked me if I could suggest somebody else from Oxford, and if Jonathan could suggest somebody else from Cambridge to make up a foursome. I suggested Alan Bennett, whom I'd seen perform, and I thought was very funny, and Jonathan suggested Peter. That's how we all got together. And we met one day in a restaurant in Soho and discussed it, rather suspicious of each other, since we'd all enjoyed some success individually at our respective universities. And then we got down to writing it, and we wrote it, I suppose, in about a couple of weeks. It was an hour show, in fact. It wasn't that long. And we were given £50 budget for wardrobe and everything, and all we had were black velvet drapes, because we couldn't afford a set. We had a piano on the stage, a grand piano, and we used to wear just grey trousers and grey sweaters, and that was our 50 quid down the drain. And then when the show came out, it caused a lot of interest, and people came up from London to see us. One really got the feeling, you know, people were coming up from the big city to see us. One will never recapture that sort of excitement again, which is really rather dreary, isn't it? And then we did it the following May. We did it in September. Oh, I can never remember the date. I always have to work it out. 1960. Started it in May 1961. And we had the advantage then of having a set built. We were rather scared of having a set built because we'd done it without one before, and we thought, oh, you know, all this extra rubbish might spoil it, but in fact it didn't. We had the piano on stage and built the set over the piano, and we had the same costumes, except we could now wear grey jackets with our grey trousers. We got a slightly bigger budget. I think the main reason for the success of the show was the fact that I exclude myself, and I'm not doing that out of any false humility, because I really feel that I didn't contribute to the substance of the sketches on the whole. But I think it was because you had three people who were very, very funny people and very politically aware, who had a good knowledge of literature and so forth, who had a good background in all sorts of subjects, and who could contribute something that was very, very much more biting than the usual sort of stuff you got on Shaftesbury Avenue, which is not a condemnation of the old type of review, which I used to enjoy immensely and still do. But I can only think that the success was due to the actual material, which happened to be largely political. And I think that was why the show was called satirical, because sending up political figures seems to be labelled as satirical, you know. And I think that was the reason that we always were slightly puzzled by the word satire ourselves. We just, you know, sounds like the Beatles who say, well, we just think of ourselves as another rock group. And we just felt ourselves as four people doing a review and trying to make it as funny as possible. It was slightly amazing to us to know that it had such a wide influence in its way. I think a lot of people who saw the show being successful, a lot of professionals probably were rather down on us for it. You know, these four amateurs sort of getting up on the stage. And I used to get sick of being called an amateur. It was really just because we'd just come out of university, and it was our first review. But I don't think there was anything amateurish about it at all. And the effect on me personally was, I suppose, primarily I just felt very happy about it. And it gave me great confidence. We did the show for 4 years, 2 years here and approximately 2 years in America. And it gave me a great feeling of confidence performing in front of a different audience every night. You know, every audience was a challenge, and it was a great schooling, you know. It also, in a sense, spoilt me for doing other people's material, since from the very word go, I've always done my material, or the material that has been jointly prepared by myself and Peter, or in the case of Beyond the Fringe, by the four of us. To a certain extent, it isolated us from other people. We never felt ourselves to be part of showbiz, I suppose, because in a sense the show was a foreign to showbiz standards. It was a very useful stepping stone into all sorts of things, because I mean, I used to think of going to Oxford as being a very useful thing to do when I was at school, you know, because it seemed to be, oh yes, you know, people always think that people who've gone to university must have had some sort of an advantage, or they've got some sort of education that, you know, is useful, which is actually a bit bogus, although that opened me out a great deal. You know, that was the main advantage of that. Beyond the Fringe opened me out a great deal and gave me back confidence that I, in fact, lost initially when we started Beyond the Fringe. And it just really opened up everything, I suppose. It was something that made one feel confident and secure. One didn't have to worry about, you know, going out to a restaurant and buying a meal, which was, you know, really marvellous. Because before I'd been fooling about doing all sorts of things. You know, I'd been writing the odd jingle, I'd been writing incidental music for the Royal Court Theatre in London, and doing the odd bit of cabaret, and trying to get on television, you know, doing 5-minute spots, that sort of thing, you know. And this regular income was, you know, just absolutely marvellous. And of course the theatre does pay well, although, as I say, we didn't get as much as we should have done. But even then it was a very good wage, and I think we all felt very secure with it. And especially when we went to America, where of course the money was probably even better. But the last night really didn't feel like any other night, you know, it just felt a bit sort of limp. And I didn't really feel, oh, well, I'm out of a job now, because the whole experience had permeated itself into my whole being, and it wasn't the sort of thing you felt was a great loss. You know, it was always there as a tremendous experience and as something that had encouraged one and taught one. So my feelings on the last night were, you know, I'm afraid rather nebulous and non-spectacular. No tears, you know, no fuss. One just sort of went. The immediate future was simple enough, because I did a project for the Boston Arts Festival, a musicalization, if you like, of Emperor Jones, the play Emperor Jones, and it was sort of done as half a ballet and half play. So there wasn't any real sort of drama about what I was going to do next, you know. When I came back to England, and I didn't want to come back to England, as a matter of fact, I wanted to stay in the States. I was enjoying it so much at the time, but I had to come back because we were doing a film version of Beyond the Fringe for the BBC. And when I came back, very soon after, I was offered a show, half-hour show, and I asked Peter Cook to be a guest on it, and it led to our first series, you know. So there was a good continuity from the end of the show. There was never any frightening gap, you know. I feel, in the sense of continuous production, that I've failed. That I failed in the sense of not actually producing more of myself, And this is something I'm trying to do now, is trying to get to that sort of essence of myself, which I think has lain pretty sort of buried for a long time, although it doesn't actually apply to my comedy work, I don't think, with Peter. That somehow has not been affected. I think musically, with my composition and with my playing, I've now got to a stage where I feel I've got to sort of pull out something else for myself, you know. But certainly I always go back, I always revert to my own feelings about my performances in the final analysis. I always listen to critics, and when critics tear me apart or reject me completely, which is, you know, which happens, I try and see what they mean. But then again, when somebody does reject you completely, then that's just hard luck in a sense, and you can't really take it to heart. Otherwise you'd change your style completely just because you want to please one critic, you know.